Hello, I'm Dexter Da Silva, Co-Chair of IAFOR's Asian Conference on Psychology and the Behavioral Sciences 2015. Joining us today is Professor Frank Ravitch, Professor of Law and William H. Stowers Chair Professor of LawAnd Religion at Michigan State University College of Law. Professor Ravitch is here to talk about constitutional reform in Japan. Thank you for joining us, Professor Ravitch.
Thank you for having me, Dexter.
Okay, my first question, I guess I'd like you to recap the issue of this question. Why is a Japanese Prime Minister's visit to Yasukuni Shrine, why does that violate the Japanese Constitution?
And this is the topic I spoke about last year at the conference. It's an important subject. Basically, Articles 20 and 89 of the Japanese Constitution have been interpreted by the Japanese Supreme Court to allow things that are sort of normal in Japanese culture or that are understood to be not things that would seem to favor religion or promote religion in purpose or effect, that those things are constitutional. So, for example, the courts upheld the groundbreaking ceremony, which included a Shinto priest at a public gymnasium. But the court has held that visits to the Yasukuni Shrine, for example, in a famous case called Ahime Tamaguchi, where the court held that, bringing political officials, sending political officials to the Yasukuni Shrine violated Articles 20 and 89. My argument has been actually that when the Japanese Prime Minister visits, even if he signs the sheet as a private individual, there's so much public attention to the fact that the Prime Minister is visiting that it actually violates Articles 20 and 89 of the Japanese Constitution.
I see. Okay, regarding religion, okay, in modern secular society, is freedom of religion an important issue?
I do. I think freedom of religion is important. It's a question that I think a lot of modern societies are facing. Japan has actually been very good as a general matter over the last several years on freedom of religion for religious minorities and so forth. Other countries like the US have been grappling with questions of where does the line between religious freedom and other people's civil rights begin. And I think that one of the reasons religion or religious freedom itself is important in a modern secular society is that not all modern societies are secular. Some have religious underpinnings, but also religious freedom is one of the diversity of voices. It allows the religious voices to speak. It doesn't mean that those voices should inherently prevail over other voices, but religious freedom allows for robust religious expression and for people to practice their faiths in the way that they want to, as long as it doesn't generally harm other people. And I think that's important. We're grappling with some of that boundary line between harm and protection of faith in America right now.
I see, okay. And other freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, those two areas Japan has dropped dramatically since Prime Minister Abe came to power in 2012, according to the Journalists Without Borders ranking. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a very troubling phenomenon. Since Shinzo Abe came to power, this past time, Japan's fallen 37 slots in the Reporters Without Borders polling on freedom of speech and freedom of the press. But it's even worse than that. I mean, there's other indications, including some opinions by the Japanese Supreme Court that have dramatically limited free speech, the government's ability to frequently at least affect mainstream media presentation. I think that there's this recent public secrets law that's taken effect. That's had some impact. People are afraid because what a public secret is not well defined, and the Abe administration has said that they'll clarify it, but the clarifications haven't been terribly helpful. And so I think there's a sense that the fall of freedom of speech and freedom of the press in Japan has been very precipitous. Some people do blame it on this public secrets law, but I think that's just a part of it. I think part of it is this sort of nationalist undertone that the Abe administration has had. It's in stark contrast to its economic policy, which tends to be very transparent. But on these other issues, there's just a complete lack of transparency, and I think some serious leaning on the media and concern about nationalist tendencies impacting freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
And that's been the media across the board, the public media, NHK, as well as the private media companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's a little bit afraid under the public secrets law because although it requires egregious circumstances, reporters can be held liable. Also, it's harder to get sources because people may be afraid to blow the whistle on the government. I think it's probably had more of an effect on private media, but certainly I'm sure it's been felt by NHK1. I mean, I don't work for NHK1, but I think it's a pretty fair assumption.
Okay, going on to a different topic, the issue of the Pacifist Constitution. And maybe this is a kind of devil's advocate type question. Is having a Pacific Constitution realistic for Japan in the 21st century, considering its closest neighbors, North Korea, China, Russia?
I think that's a hard question. I'll admit at the start to not being a global defense expert. So I'm gonna address this from the constitutional perspective, which is the Abe administration has already reinterpreted the pacifist provision. So I think that they've demonstrated whether it's good or not. I think that's up to the Japanese people, but they've demonstrated that there can be maybe a more robust sense of national defense without having to amend the Constitution. We know the administration wants to amend the Constitution and wants to affect the pacifist provision, but they've demonstrated through their reinterpretation that they're able to go pretty far in supporting national defense without getting rid of the pacifist provision. My bigger concern is the combination of a limitation on freedom of speech and freedom of press, along with getting rid of a pacifist constitution. I think if there's more inroads on the pacifist provision, but there's robust ability to whistleblow, there's robust political discourse, there's robust reporting, I think that makes it less troubling than if there's more limits on pacifist provision and less free speech, less freedom of the press. I think the combination is very dangerous. So many people are focused on amending Article 9, the pacifist provision, which I think that's up to the Japanese people. Right now they overwhelmingly oppose changing the pacifist provision. Personally, I guess I agree with them. It's a good provision, but I'm more concerned about the possible amendment to Article 96, which would not only make it easier to amend the pacifist provisions, but also the free speech provisions. And that combination is what scares me.
I see. Professor Ravitch, does Japan have a right to join a collective security umbrella?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. It's come up quite a bit recently. Under Article 9, it seems, self-defense has been allowed. At least that's how it's been interpreted. And a collective security umbrella is a collective self-defense. So to the extent that it's not offensive, to the extent that it's a defense of the collective security entities, I think it's certainly plausible that Japan could join it consistently with Article 9. I know that's probably a pretty controversial interpretation among some people, but I do think that as long as it's for self-defense, it would be acceptable.
Okay. Moving on to the US, United States, as a legal scholar, amongst the 112 Supreme Court justices who have served until now, which one resonates most with you?
Well, I'd have to pick two, and it's interesting. There are certain ones who resonate with maybe my own personal political views, but the two that I'm going to pick are actually people who resonate with me because of their judicial philosophies, and those are Justice Jackson and Justice Souter. And Justice Souter being a very recent justice, they transcended in a way political values, and I think had a very complex understanding of the United States Constitution, both historically and substantively, but they also were very good in cases involving non-constitutional law, involving other areas of law in the U.S. And I find them to be the two most interesting and the two that resonate the most with me, although I'm sure I could pick 10 others.
Very interesting. Okay, my last question is it's about IAFOR. This is your second conference. You've come back after last year. Why? Why have you come back to IAFOR? Why do you like IAFOR?
You know, I really love IAFOR's mission of being both international and interdisciplinary. For me, interdisciplinarity, if you only think within your own box, you can't really achieve that much in your discipline because you're hampered by the horizon of your discipline. I like to cross disciplines, even if it's just learning things, but certainly interdisciplinary research with IAFOR, which IAFOR fosters, is very worthwhile, and the internationality of it. The audience at this conference is always from a wide range of countries, which brings a wonderful range of not only interdisciplinary perspectives, but also international perspectives. And that combination it's relatively unusual at a conference. You don't get too many that do both.
Yes, I think I agree with you 100%. As a psychologist, educational psychologist, I find listening to your talk about Japan legal system and the constitution fascinating. It's not an area I know, but it really, as a long-term resident of Japan, I learn a lot, and it really makes the conference much more dynamic.
And for me, hearing about psychology as well, because it helps me understand how judges behave. And so there's this cross-disciplinary seating is really, it's just immensely helpful.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Ravitch.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching us at home. Please visit iafor.org if you'd like to get some more information about IAFOR, the conferences, and recent updates about what's happening in IAFOR. Thank you.